Hi, everyone. In this video, I want to introduce your third major writing project, the scholarly argument, and talk about kind of the expectations and the approach for writing this paper compared to the last two. Now at this point in the semester, you have analyzed the arguments of others in the rhetorical analysis, and you have worked on crafting your own argument for a broader community in the community-based argument. And for this last paper, you're going to be making an argument for a scholarly community in your field or majors. This is thinking about, in particular, the audience of people you would be writing towards in your field. They're going to have a particular set of knowledge. They're going to know a lot of the things you know, and you've got to think about how to add some new information to your argument or kind of add a new point of view and think about how to really get that particular audience engaged in what you're thinking about. So in terms of the assignment description, in terms of thinking about a topic, what you're looking for is an issue, problem, a concept, something that is relevant to your major field of research or your potential one. If you're changing majors, I could switch, that's fine. So thinking about that audience. And your goal here is twofold. First is to inform that audience about the issue and its complexity. So this is kind of a similar approach to what you did in the community-based argument, but that's only one part of the argument here. And then the other part is to convince your audience to either see this issue in a new way or to persuade them to take some sort of action on the issue. Now, a lot of this kind of depends on what you're talking about and what your argument is focused on. It may be that you are arguing for a new method or approach to doing things, in which case you're informing really that audience why they should do that and why it's they should listen to what you have to say about this. In other cases, it's about kind of shifting a viewpoint and just saying, we've been viewing this for so long this way, we need to kind of think about these aspects. In other cases, it might be, here's a clear issue we need to fix, and here's how we go about doing that. So there's lots of different kind of angles that you could take in this paper, depending on what you talk about. And that's something you want to keep in mind. Now, since this is a scholarly argument, this is heavily research-based. So even more so than the last paper, you'll be pulling on a lot of outside sources, several scholarly peer-reviewed academic sources in this paper. And one of the big things you need to work on is crafting your own argument and then using your sources to support your claims. So this is something we were working on in paper 2, and we're kind of taking the next step on in this third paper. And that's making sure that your argument is clear, your points are clear, and you have the evidence to support and back up your claims, and you're using that well in your paper. So it's research-based. You're exploring the issue from several different points of view, which is something you did in the last paper. But your goal is moving farther now. You're working on convincing and or persuading the audience to take some sort of action, shift their approach on something like that. So this means that not only do you need to have strong sources, but you've got to think about counter arguments, alternative points of view, and you have to address those in your paper. You can't just ignore them and say, oh, well, here's my way is the right way to do it. Let's ignore what everybody else has to say. So you'll have to do research on that and think about how to incorporate that into your argument effectively. So one of the things you're doing throughout the paper is establishing why is this relevant for the audience in your field. In some cases, it may be easy. In some cases, it may be a little bit more difficult. And then thinking about what impact or consequences the argument holds for your field. Why does this matter for people in business or nursing or English or history or psychology or any other major? Why should people care about what it is you're talking about in your argument? So you'll notice in italics on the assignment sheet, this is kind of the ultimate purpose, which is you'll be arguing to inform your audience of the importance and relevance of your specific issue and convince the audience of your view on the issue and or propose a feasible solution on the issue. Again, this kind of goes back to what your topic is. In some cases, you might have an actual course of action or a proposal about what thing the audience might do. In other cases, it might be more kind of broadly like trying to convince people and maybe not so much arguing for a direct course of action, but maybe more of an indirect one. So you've got to figure that out too. So in terms of what not to do or what to do and what not to do in this paper, some of this will sound familiar in that because you're using a lot of outside sources in this paper, you need to, again, do that effectively. Make sure you're using your sources as support. In this case, especially, you cannot let your sources overtake your argument. There's a tendency to kind of say, I found all this information, here it is. And that's not this paper. This isn't a research paper where you just kind of go out, find a topic, find a bunch of articles and say, here's what I found. you have to go the next step. And that's what a scholarly argument does. You've become the expert or somewhat of the expert in doing research on this topic. You've explored it from a lot of different angles, and now you're making the argument in this paper about why this matters, what's at stake, who's involved, what we should do about it. So it is, again, it's important that you are using your sources effectively because this is a scholarly argument for a scholarly audience. Your writing style needs to reflect that. And that's kind of another one of the key things. So it should be more formal here than in the first two papers. It doesn't have to be incredibly formal. You don't have to be kind of reaching for words to feel like you're sounding more intelligent or things like that. But you should be able to kind of show a clear, strong, scholarly voice for this paper. And so with that kind of always comes with the question, well, can you use first person? And yes, you can. And other teachers may tell you differently, but it is more and more common to see first person used in scholarly writing. But when it is used, it is done so effectively and with purpose. So you really want to think about, if you're going to use first person, why are you using first person here? It's fine to say, I will argue in this paper, or I argue this. But moments like, I think this, I believe this, that kind of language undercuts what you're saying. Too much first person will pull the audience out of your paper and make it sound much more like you have an agenda that you're pushing, or, this is kind of your pet project rather than kind of an argument that they should be invested in. But also it's weird if you are bringing in a personal experience to not use first person. So you can use first person in this paper, but you need to do so effectively and really think about, if you're going to use it, when you use it, what work is it doing for you and for the reader? Beyond that, again, making sure you incorporate your sources while they are cited. As I'll talk about in a minute, you have the option to write this paper in the style used by your field. So you need to recognize and use those guidelines for your field effectively. So your sources should be varied here, and that means offering different points of views. And one of the things that when you're doing this research, if you see kind of different people arguing and having different views on the same topic, that's something you need to address. So you can't just assume that you'll find a batch of sources and all the sources will just agree and be perfect for what you're talking about. So you need to make sure that when you're bringing them into your paper, you really are accurately representing the original source, and then figure out how it relates to your other sources and how this kind of all builds into your argument that you're making. And part of this is what you'll be working on in the annotated bibliography, which I'll talk about a little bit more in this video, and then in more depth in a separate video. So beyond that, make sure, this is kind of an obvious one, but still occasionally I run into papers that aren't putting forth an argument. So make sure you have an argument at the heart of your paper that you're making, and you're putting forth some sort of solution or course of action, something that your audience can do about this issue moving forward. So, and again, too, I just want to note here, this doesn't have to be world changing. So sometimes people feel like they need to have a topic that is going to change the entire game. And a lot of times in academic writing, the focus is much smaller, because when you try to go too big, there's too much to address. So they get very narrow and specific with their topic and say, here's one thing we can do, and maybe talk about how that fits into the larger picture, but not necessarily try to tackle the entire larger picture in a single paper or a single argument. So the assignment goals here is really to think critically about concepts and issues relevant to your field of research, your major, and with that, to be able to demonstrate effective and balanced research methods to show you're able to read and engage and incorporate the conversations going on in your field into your own writing, and then thinking about what the rhetorical strategies are for an academic argument, and really thinking about how to craft one on your own. So I mentioned there's going to be a heavy research component. You need to find at least 8 credible outside sources for your paper. All of these sources need to be relevant, related to your topic. At least 5 of them need to be scholarly, peer-reviewed journal or academic book articles that you bring into the paper. And it is your responsibility to make sure that these meet those guidelines. Again, as I mentioned with the last paper, some of the best databases, hands down, are the Maybe Library databases, such as Academic Search Complete, as good starting points for finding scholarly sources. Don't forget you have the library available as a resource. If you are on campus, you can always go in and talk to them, and they can help you find sources. You can also talk to them online. They have an online communication service. So if you aren't near campus but still want to reach out to the library and get help, you can talk to them. So you'll need to have 8 outside sources. All of these will need to be cited in the body of your paper and on the works cited page, references page, bibliography, whichever citation style you use. You'll need to make sure that they're cited in both ways throughout the paper. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about not just your topic, but how to write the paper and how to bring in your sources. So in terms of selecting a topic, you need to make sure that this is a topic and not just a subject. I mentioned just a little while ago that you want to be focused and specific, because if you get big and you get broad, it's really hard to write a focus paper. If you try to write a paper saying here's how to fix climate change, that's huge, and you're not going to do it in the space of this paper. But if you write a smaller paper on, say, the impact of changing to LED light bulbs, I don't know, does it sound exciting? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a much more narrow focused topic and allows you to kind of get into the angle from a particular way and think about, here's one thing that could be done. So you want to think about a focus topic for the paper. It needs to be current. It needs to be relevant. So it needs to be an ongoing topic for the field. And you need to be able to present a specific view on it. So it needs to be debatable and or controversial. It can't be like something that says, oh, we all agree, there's no argument here to be made. And if you need to think about what proposal, course of action, what is it you can do to kind of comment on this issue and guide your audience moving forward on this topic. So that's something you want to keep in mind. I will be looking at your topics early in the process to give you feedback there. Make sure if you need to narrow it down, make changes, alter things, you could do so. But as always, don't hesitate to contact me if you have questions. Feel free to send me an email and let me know if you have a topic you're thinking about, but you're not sure whether it works or not. So the length and format of this paper are different from the first two papers. First off, it's a longer paper. So the body of the paper here is a minimum of 2,000 words and should be no more than 2,500 words. So that's the range you're working on for this paper. With that, you have the option for this paper to use the academic style used by your field. So this is part of that whole process of writing an academic argument. So if you're in a field that uses APA, you use APA for this paper. You use MLA, you use MLA, Chicago, Turabian, whatever it is your field uses, you're going to be using that to write this paper. So one of the things you'll mention in your topic paragraph for this paper is what style you're going to be using. Now, I won't cover all the academic styles in this unit. So there are, again, a lot of online resources like the Purdue OWL that has especially, extensive guides on APA and MLA. But it is your responsibility to be looking at that and figuring out those things. Otherwise, the paper should have the same basic format, 12-point Times New Roman or Calibri font, double-spaced, 1-inch margins, kind of all the stuff we've been doing on the first two papers. And then, of course, at the end, you should have, for every paper, the works cited page, the bibliography, the references, whatever the style calls for, you will need that page at the end of the paper, citing all your outside sources in the paper. So what I'm looking for when I'm grading the paper is that there's a clear rhetorical purpose. In other words, you have an argument that is established and supported to your reader early on in the paper. You are exploring this issue through multiple lenses. So this could be ideological, social, cultural, political, economic, historical. And I don't expect you to address all of those, but probably 2 or 3 of those. When you're articulating why this matters, you want to be able to explain, here's why this matters. You are using inquiry-based research and writing, which is driven by the desire to study an issue relevant to your major field of study. Especially here, this is, you're taking that step into doing kind of the deeper work in your field and modeling that in this paper. And then there should be a acceptable and feasible proposal, course of action, something your audience can do about this issue at the end of your paper that's clear and established. And again, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking, but it needs to be something they can do, and it needs to be shown to the reader that there's going to be some potential impact by taking this course of action. So since it's a bigger, longer paper, there are a few more requirements than for either of the first two papers. It's worth a few more points overall. So the topic paragraph is, again, worth 10 points. And like I said, you'll be introducing your topic as well as the citational style you'll be using for the paper. to be doing the annotated bibliography, which is going to be writing up short annotations, well, not short, paragraph annotation for each of your 8 outside sources, as well as the citations. And as I mentioned, I will have another video that gets more in depth in that. But that's an opportunity to not just find sources, but actually think about what they talk about, how they relate to one another, kind of think about these larger networks of knowledge and ideas that they're bringing up. Then again, we'll have a full draft due. This one is longer, so 2,000 words in the body of the paper. That's 15 points. And then the final draft, the breakdown is the same: 50 points on content, 10 points on organization, 10 points on academic formatting and citations, and 5% on grammar mechanics. So, like I said, I will talk about the annotated bibliography in another video that goes over that aspect of the assignment a little bit more clearly and in depth. But the dates are up on D2L. If you have questions about topics, please let me know. I am glad to help. If you have an idea, but you're not sure what angle to take it, or if you're not sure whether it'll work or not, come and let me know. Send me an email, and I'm glad to go over that with you. Otherwise, good luck, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with on this last paper.